I'd like to introduce, we'll go from Josh, Chris, and Scott. We'll make some introductions and we'll get started.
Great. Well, good morning, everyone. Josh Friedel, Vice President of Product Development, CVS Health. Been with the organization 18 years. I'm a pharmacist by background, located outside of Chicago, and just a privilege to be here with all of you.
Great. Chris Crawford with Vivio Health. Started my career in the benefits consulting and brokerage space. So I see a couple of old bosses and supervisors in the audience, which is nice to see. Left that world about 3.5 years ago, just because specialty drugs and pharmacy benefits were the issue that I didn't feel like we could crack, really, and we need that specialized expertise. So jumped in with both feet with a pharmacy benefit consulting firm, and so in that firm, it was my job to analyze all the different solutions that are out there and analyze and try to get that drug spend down. And the thing that kept coming up was no matter what we did with the PBM contract, no matter how good the rates were, no matter how good rebates were, we'd go back to these clients and say, we saved you so much money, we've got this amazing contract, and whatever we did, it didn't matter because specialty was still going up every year. So really wanted to dive in and look at alternative models out there and different solutions, and so that's when I joined Vivio Health earlier this year, and really looking forward to the discussion.
Great, thanks, Chris.
Thank you. I'm Scott Musial. I'm the Chief Pharmacy Officer at Rightway Healthcare and also the General Manager for our PBM. Rightway is a new to the world PBM that really relies on consumer navigation to help change the therapy that individuals are on and drive to the best outcomes. Really excited to be in front of this group today, the audience, to share our thoughts. I will share one thought. My most prized designation in my life is GFOE. That is grandfather of 8.
Emphasis on grandfather, right, Scott?
I'm old.
Well, again, thank you so much for our panelists. Let's get after it. So the first place I'd like us to start, and this is really a question that we can go ahead and keep in a brief response, get some insight from each of y'all, specific to really balancing cost and outcomes. We know that specialty pharmacy accounts for a lot of the respective healthcare dollar, but when we look at the significant advancements and the miraculous nature of some of these medications, how do we and how do advisors need to think about bridging the gap of justifying cost and the outcome?
Mind if I go first?
Please.
I would say, the outcomes is the first priority, right? We need to make sure we've got effective therapy for patients that need it. I know for myself, not a grandfather yet, but I've got a couple kids, and I think about myself both as a dad, right? They need important therapy, but also my job. How do we best manage the cost for a full population? But you want the outcomes first. But I will say sometimes the best outcome comes from not starting that drug, right? Reducing that amount or going in a completely different direction. So I do think there's strategies to do that, and I will share more about those here, and the companies here at the table all help organizations do that. But I think it starts with the outcome first.
Yeah, I think we'll all agree on that. It's really about the outcomes. And I think, one of the things too within specialty is there's a lot of focus on the discussion of the new $1 million treatments and what's going to happen in gene therapy. And it gets a lot of attention, but the likelihood of one of those things hitting a plan is so low. And I feel like a lot of times then people look past paying $100,000 for a skin rash and doing all these things that are coming up every time that are just over-prescribed, and taking a look at it. And so I think it's, yes, we want to care about those things, but I think, the way we look at it is we take the same approach, whether it's a $20,000 annual cost or $1 million annual cost. Is the data there to support that this drug is actually going to work? Let's look at the patient's actually detailed medical records and make sure it's going to work for them. And when it works for them, then we're good to go. And I know a lot of people in the audience, a big claim can really kill a plan, but there's also, we want medicine. We want life-changing technology. We want those things. So I think the takeaway from our perspective is we'll pay for good drugs, but in this country, we overpay for drugs that don't do what we think they do.
Yeah, it's a fair point. Scott?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that we all are gonna kind of take an angle on outcomes. And I would just say that I think we need to redefine outcomes. Right now, if you just confine outcomes to I'm changing the cost curve from a healthcare perspective, some of the investments that we're making with specialty drugs or medical therapies aren't going to deliver a really strong return on investment. But when you start to bring in things like productivity, lost time at work, those sorts of elements, it starts to expand, what you might consider paying, the price you might consider paying for those types of therapies. And then the other thing that right now, and trust me, I am in no way a single payer, but I think the one thing that we need to begin to solve for is investments that are being made by employer-sponsored plans today are actually going to benefit the governmental programs in the future by changing their cost curve. How do we link those so that the employers aren't, kind of shouldering an unfair burden that if somebody is healthier, as they head into their retirement age, that there's some sort of, recruitment of that. And so a number of ways that could be approached.
Yeah, I appreciate that point of view, and I think there's a bit of this cat and mouse game that the marketplace, especially for self-funded plan sponsors, it almost feels as if, at least in our practice, we hear, we're trying to keep up with the latest therapies that have come to market, or we're hearing of, whether it's the Alzheimer's medications that have come out or the biospecialty pipeline, which is ever increasing. At what point do we find that solidarity around being able to agree on reasonable pricing?
Yeah. So
or maybe that's the third rail here.
Listen, I'm the furthest from wanting the government to be more involved than they already are involved, and so I don't endorse that perspective. I do think that quite honestly, the PBMs aren't really being the counterweight that we need them to be against pharma in this equation. And quite honestly, I think everybody recognizes it's because of the economic model that the PBMs have. It's so complicit in helping to kind of fast track some of the adoption of these drugs and the overutilization of these drugs and the profiting from it. And so I do think we need to kind of figure out how do we get the employer-sponsored groups to start taking a stand for saying we want our PBM to be a very critical lever against pharma. We want you coming in fighting force and pushing back of, we don't think we should be paying $55,000 for this drug or covering this drug, and bringing that into our process to build models that represent what the plan sponsors want, not models that are built to kind of take advantage of the economic realities that a traditional PBM could have.
If I could add to that, because I totally agree with you, and just to share an interesting experience we had. So 2 years ago, we introduced a very different economic model. Let's move away from an economic model focused on rebates, and let's just get to net cost. And what was interesting to us is it was not accepted from our plan sponsors, from the consultants that support them. So I would agree. I think we need a combined kind of surround sound effect to say, let's galvanize ourselves around a different economic model, because then I think you can use the levers that we all have to start to change that. Because I would agree, I think a list price solution simplifies some of the key points of complexity that exist in our market today. But we've got to get an economic model surrounding that so that everyone lines up and says that makes sense, because that's how the business is going to be run. Today, it's still in conflict with that, just pure net cost versus a rebate kind of arrangement.
I do want to hear from Chris, but I just want to make one real quick point. Like the call to action for everybody that's in the audience today is, right now everybody gets shy with this thought of, oh my God, if we do highly managed things like change to a different model that Josh represented, that's disruption, and oh my gosh, what's going to happen? My HR phone is going to start ringing and all of this. Guess what? Every year there is so much disruption that's put into a plan. Formularies change, network change, benefits changes. And so I would just simply say, let's take on the conversation and change it from disruption, that it's actually to action. You're now actively managing the program to run after all of this opportunity that exists, and kind of wrap the consumer, wrap the plan with the right level of resources to be able to take on those activities that will clearly help both the consumer and the plan sponsor save money.
For us in the industry, if we see an RFP come in with traditional guarantees tied to cost of goods, so if we're asking for a rebate guarantee and an AWP guarantee on specialty, we know that that consultant doesn't get it.
Yep.
They don't get it. And so I think so the answer is, how do you do it? It's hard, right? It takes having clinicians come in and analyze, right, clinical pathways and how people do it, and looking at decisions that are made when you're switching somebody off of, one drug to another. Is it sound? Do those pharmacists and medical directors agree? So, audit the process, right, and then make sure that you're getting clear cost of goods. How are they actually procuring it? And you want rebates, and you want, our opinion is separating the specialty pharmacy as well from the manager, is important. So an example of that would be, and you can kind of follow this train through with like generic Truvada, right? So if you have a traditional PBM contract in place and somebody had to bid on rebates, AWP guarantees, and everything else, right? They are not incentivized to move to generic Truvada when it came out, right? A very high cost drug on HEV. So that's one. So if you don't have those rebate guarantees in place, now somebody can move to the generic. But the story doesn't end there. Then within the generics, there are 10 different manufacturers for generic Truvada, right? And so good kind of take home, go and look at your claim file and see what you're paying when it comes through there. If you don't use market competitive kind of tactics to look at the cost of goods, within our partners, right? So we don't own our own specialty pharmacy, we have different partnerships. The price goes from a 30-day supply of generic Truvada being $26.10 to over $1,000 between partners. And so it's kind of getting into that, really understanding that this is a drug by drug discount decision when you go through and give up a little bit of this aggregate guarantee where everybody can hit that number, because they'll hit the number. They will always hit the guaranteed number because they have the flexibility to do it. And so you have to step, back from that. It's tough, but if we're really going to make some change, that's what needs to get done, in my opinion.
Yeah, the one thing that I'd also totally agree with, kind of the vast price disparity that exists in the marketplace today, and why open markets are really the best approach to solve this. And so I'm not a big fan of like exclusive relationships and things like that. I do want to recognize one thing that I'm sure the vast majority of the advisors and brokers out here have heard is that the rebates are funding the HR programs today, right? That's flowing in, and that's serving as their revenue stream to do other things that the HR department has to do. So there's this very complex discussion that actually needs to happen within the companies around how do you fairly fund HR to be able to do the things that they need to do to, kind of create engagement and recruit and retain high quality talent and get off of the rebate, kind of, IV line. And that is a really complex conversation in and of itself that is very difficult for us as providers to engage with the HR. And that's one thing that you, in the privileged seat that you guys sit in with your plan sponsors, is to begin to talk about how can we, kind of not be running our HR systems on kind of rebates that then liberates the HR executives to begin to make different decisions should they want to.
Yeah, in our practice, we tell folks you can go broke buying on sale, right? When you, just because you're spending a lot to get a specific branded product, just because you're getting a rebate doesn't make it the lowest net cost. And I think a lot of us understand that concept. But this rigmarole that we find ourselves in, I think it's a dangerous trap that is it's just a part of this industry. But as we look to change that and look for other alternative ways to help advisors, I think that's one of the things that we want to pull from this conversation as well, is what are some of those tangible paths and alternative ways to measure? And how can we put other skin in the game, if you will, to avoid, let's say, a dependence on rebates or other offsets or cost channels. Because this has everything to do with the affordability gap, too, for patients. And that's where I'd like to go with conversation next. So as I had mentioned, average specialty therapy, $80,000 on the annuum. Average savings account, $2,000 to the American consumer. Those economics just are a bit foreboding. So what I'd like to understand is, from your points of view, through the different economic channels that exist, whether it's copay assistance, whether it's alternative funding strategies, what are some of the ways that PBMs, alternative strategies, bolt-on strategies, what are some of the ways that we can help try to shift the dollars one way or the other to make it more affordable for plan sponsor as well as for the member?
I mean, they are a part of the cost management strategies that a lot of clients leverage today. I think there's questions about, I think they'll be sustainable in terms of there will be alternate cost savings models out there, but I think which ones will be present at any given time, we may see alteration. I'm talking about the wide range from retail cash programs like a GoodRx, all the way through reimportation, going outside of the country for drugs, and everything in between, like you mentioned, copay assistance, and how that can be leveraged within a client's benefit design for copay accumulation or copay optimization. Those are absolutely items that help both plans better afford these medications and the members also afford. And I think that needs to be in balance. You don't want to just have it all become plan savings and the member still on the hook for the same cost, because it can be still very high even after all of those things are applied. One of the things we guide our clients on, so we do a lot of those things for our clients today. And one of the areas we want to focus on is making sure that those things don't disrupt the other things that the plan is trying to do to manage their costs. So for example, it's not surprising, it's usually the branded products that offer copay assistance. So if you leverage that to help both patient affordability and lower plan costs, suddenly a brand Gleevec is less costly to the member than the generic. Sure. So that's working against moving to the generic. And we see that today. So thinking about designs that level the playing field so that you don't have that disincentive, because I think we're all agreeing, you want to get to the lowest net cost product. In this case, it is the generic. So I think thinking about strategies like that that don't disrupt what you're trying to do around generics or other things. The second that we focus on is it appropriate to do? So foundations, need-based support, there's programs out there that do that. They are meant for those who don't have insurance, for those that meet certain financial requirements. And if those are overused, and we see it today, because as a pharmacy, we support a lot of members through a lot of these different programs, about May, suddenly the funds are gone. Those foundations have literally run out of money to continue to provide that support. So I think we need to be mindful of how those are being used, because we could be supporting one area and leaving other patients in there and creating an affordability gap for them. So I think we have to be cognizant of those types of things.
Yeah, 100% agree. That it's an affordability thing for the member, and I think it took me a while to catch on, because again, growing up in the broker consulting world, I was thinking like cost shares. What's the cost share, no matter your plan design? Well, 12%, 10% member out of pocket. And I remember the days of, well, what's your answer to specialty drug? Well, let's do a $200 copay, right, for specialty drug. And I think it's changing the mindset that if you have a partner that is managing utilization, right, and is doing all that work to make sure that, no, this is the right drug for this person. Especially cost share, people in the audience probably know better than me. When we look at our clients, 2%, something like that, give or take. So I think the cost to the member is significant, right? If they have to pay a couple $1,000s, that could mean them not filling the drug, and we don't want that. So it's kind of, whatever, jumping over $1 to get a penny, just make them free. Make specialty drugs free. You can do, different deductibles and specialty whatever, because if you're turning it over to somebody who's really going to manage it and get the drug, get that person on the right drug, you can access, not necessarily the foundations, we don't do that, we're not excluding specialty drugs as a covered benefit or anything, but there are manufacturer assistance and copay, and so you're asking something of the member when we get those, and well, why in the heck should I do this if you're going to, as the plan, keep all these dollars coming back? Why you should do it is because we're going to put a plan design in place where you don't have to pay out of pocket. And we're concerned about your safety. We're concerned about getting on the right drug. We're concerned about working with your physician to make sure this drug is actually going to work. And so it just changes that dynamic, and you don't have to pay anything. So again, I think a takeaway is thinking through these plan designs and this copay assistance and thinking that's going to drive consumerism in specialty. Or consumerism in specialty doesn't, it's not a thing. And we have to kind of get away from thinking about it. Again, just my opinion.
Yeah, before I answer the question, I just want to say, As an individual that owned pharmacies early in my career and for the past 30 years have kind of run and managed PBMs, I'm wholly embarrassed that an organization like GoodRx was able to come in and exist. We clearly dropped the ball, both in terms of being pharmacists and figuring out how to get lower cost drugs in patients' hands and from a PBM standpoint. Should have never happened. And we should be embarrassed. Congratulations to them. They've done a really great job for doing it, but we should be embarrassed. I fundamentally do not believe copay assistance is sustainable. It is a point of service rebate that we're taking advantage of right now. And it is not going to be but another, I don't know whether it's 12 months or 18 months, but I think we need some clear water coming out of COVID, where pharma is going to come in and they're going to start to identify those claims as being non-rebatable. And so then you're going to be in the conundrum that you might have if you've heard of 340B, if something transacts under a government subsidized program, pharma doesn't have to give rebates. I think they're going to start doing that. So we need to start thinking about things differently. And I agree, like right now, the only lever that we have is utilization management, but we've got to take on getting pharma to a better point in net price discussions. This list to net of, hey, I'm going to charge you 100, I'm going to give you 35 on rebate, I know I'm going to lose out on another 8 when it's going to copay assistance, I know when I blend in all of 340B, I'm losing another 12, blah, blah, blah. Right now, pharma will tell you, and they're correct, that they're getting 45 cents on every 100 cents of their wholesale acquisition costs. I agree with them. All right, just give me 45. Forget about all the other shenanigans. Well, like, why are we even dealing with that? Just give me 45. If you recognize it, I recognize it. Let's just agree to get to that point. And I don't think we're being forceful enough because we have to change the economic models that exist in PBM today. We change that where people, no longer have any incentives related to the negotiation of rebates. It's just how do we get down to that low list net price? I think that helps. It's not the panacea. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news. My kids call me cranky grandpa. There is not one single silver bullet out here. We have to. This is a 5% this, 4% that, 3% this, 2% that, and maybe we make a 10% change on your specialty costs for the past year. Maybe it could be greater, maybe it could be less, but this is all about kind of tactical things, and generally speaking, they're going to be tailored to your plan sponsor's needs because they each have their own distinct utilization patterns, both from a drug mix standpoint and where they're navigating and getting those drugs. And so you do need to be thinking about, boy, when I'm ready and I've convinced my plan sponsor to get active and go after and manage this, I've got to be able to put that plan on an execution platform that is going to deliver the strategy that we've designed in a collaborative fashion.
Do you think that alternative funding strategies as they exist today are sustainable paths to helping that 250 life case or that 2,000 life case avoid a potentially catastrophic claim?
Yeah, I'll go first because I'm interested, from a CVS perspective, right? Because the leverage that organizations like CVS have in the marketplace can really make a difference. And I think, getting back to we get what we kind of ask for, and so if we keep asking for rebates, we keep doing this, then the rebates keep going up. I think the good news is if we get truly life-changing, like breakthrough therapies, right? There's not a lot of rebate there, right? I mean, because it's working, right? This drug is gonna work, and you can quibble over is it worth this or this, but if it has the outcomes and it's improving quality of life, extending, life, if it's curing things, right? If it's a cure, right? Hepatitis C, we go back to that cured it. That's a good drug. That's the kind of stuff we want. But rebates on these other things that aren't a cure, and are lifetime medications, right? Big Pharma wants a lifetime patient, paying them 50 grand a year forever, and they want all competition gone. And so it is up to us to push back on these things.
Site of care is another important one. Like, I think a lot of plans are leaving savings on the table because the drug's either being dispensed from or administered through a more costly space. So I think looking at all of those pieces is probably a more sustainable way to manage costs than just saying drop the benefit, ask someone else to cover it, because when that stops, it's all going to come shifting back, and that's probably a big financial situation to absorb when that shifts back.
Yeah, Ryan, the one thing that I do think PBMs could serve, kind of a newer role that they haven't in the past, is with the wealth of data that PBMs have coming in, and I think Chris recognizes this. He's built a business around this. That we actually need to be doing better jobs in challenging ourselves once you have stable patients, what you're able to do with stable patients. And don't go running around, because there are a lot smarter clinicians up here, including Ryan, and he's not even a pharmacist.
I play one on TV.
But I fundamentally have an inkling in the anti-inflammatory condition, just because of the mechanism of action, that in stable patients, you can start dose decreasing and keep individuals stable. Could you imagine what would happen to your costs if everybody that was on Humira today could go down to a 50% dose once they've hit a certain level? But there's no incentive right now. The PBM doesn't have any incentive to do that because they might lose out on rebates. The specialty pharmacy doesn't have any incentive on that because they lose out on the dispensing margin of all of that. Pharma doesn't have any incentive. We need, kind of somebody to step into the breach to say, you know what, we're going to continue to monitor this stuff. When we identify these opportunities, off we go. And you can see this in all sorts of drugs. Like dirty secrets, such as individuals who take their statin every other day actually have the same cardioprotective when they are taking them on a daily basis. Please don't go running around telling your parents to stop taking their drugs. But I'm just saying that the mechanisms of action of a lot of these drugs lend themselves to much better post-marketing surveillance and being able to change the physical utilization of them. And we need to be demanding of the PBMs, or if they're not going to do it, somebody else stepping into that breach and saying, you know what, we're going to continue to monitor it, because the pharma companies have been monitoring it, and I guarantee you that data is buried in their vaults that they don't want anybody to see. And so I do think there's some things that we can do to help also, kind of push sustainability. And then the last thing that I'll say is, a lot of smart people in the room, and everybody's, running after how to do cost savings. But at the end of the day, we're probably spending 20% or 30% or maybe even more on drug therapy that really we don't need to be spending anything on, quite honestly. So again, just to be a little bit controversial, instead of cutting out specialty drugs that might change someone's life, why don't we cut out acute therapy? Why are we paying for antibiotics? Like, they're inexpensive, at most might be $50. Why don't we have the member pay for those things? Shift to all 11, 12, 16, whatever the percent is, over to better cover chronic disease, more curative therapies, that sort of stuff. And so shift where we're spending money to where we're going to get better investment.